Welcome to another episode of Hat Collecting, the multi-passion experience. This month for July in 2025, I'm doing a special mini-series, the Disability Experience, where I am interviewing a variety of other people that I know who have various disabilities. Some are the same as mine, some are different. I'm your host, Lacey Artemis. My pronouns are she and they. I am a white, early 40s feminine presenting person with long dark hair, and I'm wearing black headphones and a light purple top. And I have a guest today who I will let introduce themselves.
Right. I'm Robin. I am a executive director of a cancer research lab. And while disability and long COVID research is not my research specialty, it is unfortunately my lived experience. So I am approaching this both from the perspective of a medical researcher and of somebody who lives with a varying number of genetic disabilities plus long COVID every day. And I'm joining you from work bed, which is my home office, as versus bed where I sleep. So in the morning, I get up and I switch to work bed to start work because fatigue.
Yes. Well, why don't we jump straight into that? I know that you have a few medical illnesses that you're dealing with. So I normally say, like, what disability or disabilities plural do you live with that you want to talk about today?
So the primary two things that are most wrong with me, aside from the long COVID, is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is the most common connective tissue disorder. And if you go look up for information about this online, you'll see a whole lot of, oh, it's rare, it's 1 in 500 people. But one, it's significantly underdiagnosed, but also to really think about what 1 in 500 means, because that's a lot of people. And it causes multi-system complaints because, in essence, it creates weak collagen, and collagen underlies, turns out, everything in the body. So your tendons and your ligaments and your muscles and your bone and literally every structure is made up of collagen in various ways. And so when you have sad, weak collagen, things do not work nearly as well as they should. And then the other thing that I have, the more familiar term to people may be MCAS, or Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. However, in my case, it is caused by what's called hereditary alpha tryptophanemia syndrome, which essentially means that everybody has tryptase in their bodies and it does all sorts of helpful things for you. However, in my case, I have too many copies of the gene to produce tryptase, and so my body overproduces it, and then that overloads my mast cells, and then my mast cells go pop at every excuse. And mast cells are amazing, wonderful things that everybody has, and they're essentially the sort of the sentinels and the first aid medics of the immune system, in the sense that they are cells that go to sites where healing or inflammation or other things need to happen, and they carry about 200 different kinds of chemicals inside them. And when they are needed for an allergic or inflammatory or healing or other reactions, they degranulate, which basically means they break apart and they dump these mediators out. And this works great in the average body. However, for people like me, they tend to pop at all sorts of things they should not be popping at. So it's like, oh, you have friction on your skin, oh, sunlight, oh, you had some orange juice. Like, it's the triggers are so wide, and it can cause a massive number of different symptoms. And COVID itself can create MCAS, or it can set off MCAS in people, which is really unfortunate because now we're seeing a lot of new onset MCAS people showing up as a result of COVID infections. Thankfully, EDS cannot really be changed because it's just a collagen type thing. MCAS can be successfully treated in many, many cases. So when mine finally got correctly diagnosed and treated, I went from completely bedridden, unable to eat, trying to survive on about 500 calories a day, most of which was boost drinks because I couldn't keep anything else down because my gut was so inflamed. And I had the energy to walk for about 5 minutes, and then I'd have to sit and rest. And within 2 weeks of starting treatment, which at that time was literally just high-dose antihistamines, I was doing 5K hikes. I was putting on 5 pounds. It was amazing. I had energy. I felt human again. And So yeah, so it can be successfully treated. I mean, now I'm on more medications than that. I'm on a mast cell stabilizer and other things as well. But I would say for anybody who is struggling with symptoms of MCAS, if they have a whole lot of things that are happening in their body that don't seem to make sense, that seem to come and go, testing shows up fine, like you get tested for things and it's just like, I don't know, everything looks good here. And you have this like symptom pattern that is coming and going over time, or some things may stay more continuously, but a whole lot of different things are going wrong and nothing seems to relate to each other. It could be MCAS in that case. And it can show up very, very differently from person to person, because one person may have weight loss and constipation and hives, and another person may have weight gain and diarrhea and blinding migraines. You know, it can affect every single system because mast cells are through our entire body. And so the symptoms we're having at any given time have to do with where the most mast attacks are happening, where things are degranulating the most, what is happening due to the local inflammation in that area. Many people have like cutaneous skin symptoms, some do not. I'm one of those that does not. But for many people, hives and things like that, or like dermatographia, where you can like draw a line and then it'll welt up really big and red. I can get that a little bit on high histamine days. I can get a pink, like I can draw, hello on my arm and it'll show up a little bit pink, but it's not nearly to the extent like where actual welts will show up for many people. But yeah, GI symptoms, super common because you have a lot of mast cells in your gut. Because keep in mind, these are sort of the medics, right? So they're meant to be the first responders at something that is a threat to the body. And a lot of threats to the body come in through the mouth and go through the GI tract. So you have a lot of mast cells lining the GI tract. So there's, for example, cases of IBS that are actually misdiagnosed and are in fact MCAS. Where we're thinking that these other things are other things. I mean, I used to think I had asthma. I got diagnosed with asthma, and then it turned out it was MCAS. As soon as I got an MCAS treatment, the asthma basically disappeared. So there's a lot of things that are related back to, even pain conditions can be related to MCAS. So I would strongly advise, anybody who is considering that, maybe just try the high dose antihistamines and see what happens. Because other than getting sleepy, there's not really significant risks to trying high dose antihistamines. They are over the counter. You can find out Dr. Afrin, AFRIN, has a website that has a lot of information about it and a suggested protocol for people who can't get their doctors to sign on for. It's tricky because MCAS really only got recognized within the last decade. So a lot of doctors still don't know about it or aren't particularly interested in signing on, and testing does miss even though we do have tests now, they miss a significant number of people with MCAS.
I think I might be misremembering the number, but I think you had told me something like 16% of European descended people have.
Yeah.
Can you reiterate what that was for me?
So yeah, you are remembering accurately, which is that the only demographic study we've done so far is on Europeans, and that gets into a whole other side issue about how clinical trials do not serve populations that are not European very well. But to not digress into that, about 16% of the European descended population has a predisposition for MCAS to varying degrees. And I think that's a big part of what we're seeing now, where we're seeing the onset COVID cases. It's because it's people who had this predisposition to begin with, and then this is sending them over the edge. And I actually had an allergist out to Cambridge tell me a few weeks ago, and I haven't looked up data for this myself, but this is what the allergist said, is that it's probably so high in these populations, and this is specific to HAT. Not everything that is MCAS is because of HATs. That's actually a subset of MCAS. But people like me, you probably saw a lot more people with increased tryptase genes survive the Black Death, because we have a little bit of resistance to infection due to the increased numbers of tryptase, increased tryptase within our bodies. So as a result, there was probably a survival benefit when plagues were going through for people with my genotype. And so it's quite possible that if we did demographic studies on other populations, we might see, for example, a much lower rate among Black folks who are African descended, because the plague did not affect those areas in the same way as it affected Europe. So who knows? It's interesting. I don't have research to back it up, but I'm curious at some point, see if I can find out more about it.
Right. So I guess my next question, because you've touched on long COVID a few times, and this is
Yeah.
something we've talked about a lot.
Mhm.
I'm one of the few remaining COVID conscious people. What do you think is the most important thing for people to know or be aware of in regards to long COVID if they've maybe stopped paying as much attention to it?
So the big one I would say is that long COVID is still here. It is the biggest threat that is currently facing people who are catching COVID. The research suggests that risk is cumulative. So each subsequent COVID infection adds on more risk of developing long COVID. Really depends on the studies, and we're still dealing with the issue that not everybody is defining long COVID the same. But studies currently are saying anywhere from 4% to 20% are showing long COVID at this time. And in practical terms, what this means is that there's hundreds of millions of people now dealing with long COVID around the world. And it's significant. There's multiple subtypes now that we've identified. So I believe, trying to think, it might have been December or January, like December 2024 or January 2025. Nature published a really good study identifying like 4 or 5 different distinct subtypes of long COVID. I can talk with a lot of detail about the one that I have, which is dysautonomic. But there's other subtypes that focus more on, say, kidney impairment or other issues. And that's the other thing. Long COVID has over 200 different symptoms that can fall under this umbrella. There was a pretty robust study put out by a patient-led group that identified like a massive list of different symptoms people were dealing with. But really common ones, brain fog is a big one. A lot of people are having new onset neuropsychiatric difficulties, such as new sleeping disorders, new anxiety, new depression. Post-COVID psychosis has been identified, although thankfully it's not as common as the depression and anxiety. So cognitive deficits are definitely a part of it. And not for everybody. Again, there's different subtypes, different people will be affected to different degrees. For me, how it showed up was that I suddenly could no longer stand up without my heart rate skyrocketing to 180, which is not good. and very rapidly you get dizzy and then you become a fall risk. And the reason this is happening is a condition called dysautonomia, where the nerves that control, so your autonomic nervous system controls all the functions in your body that you don't have conscious control over. So it's things like blood pressure, it's heart rate, it's temperature, it's sweating. So all of these things that people can't consciously do for themselves, the brain itself handles that. And in dysautonomic conditions, that control gets disrupted. And so what we have been seeing is that, yeah, now you have people that are dealing with what's called orthostatic hypotension, where you stand up and, the blood pressure starts going up and down and the heart rate just skyrockets. And this is to the point where for some people, like being upright is simply no longer possible. On my rough days now, I use a wheelchair, and that's new since COVID. I never had to use a wheelchair before, but now it is a thing. And for a while, it was a thing all the time until thankfully there was a working group, a Canadian working group that put out a really good position paper on how to deal with long COVID dysautonomia. And part of it is heavy duty compression. So this is like medical grade compression, like 20 to 30 mmHg. And if you have it from essentially your toes up until your ribs, and you drink about 1.5 liters of electrolytes every day, you have enough sufficient blood volume and it's forced to stay up here in your chest where it can do where it needs to do, what it needs to do. And then you're able to stay upright. Woo! So now every day, from morning until I'm ready to go to sleep, I have on heavy duty compression that allows me to stand, because that is something I can no longer do since long COVID. And then I got COVID again. And as we have found in long COVID, subsequent infections tend to worsen things. Not for everybody, but it is pretty common. And so reinfection becomes a real risk for those with long COVID. And for me, what that did was take me from, sometimes I have to use my wheelchair now to often I have to use my wheelchair. And the fatigue is so next level that I'm probably out of my wheelchair, or out of, my bed. Sorry, my bed. I'm upright for probably a couple hours a day at most. And like that's including sitting. because my body doesn't have the capacity to deal with it anymore. And in terms of walking and doing actual exercise type things like that, if I go beyond, say, about 20 minutes a day, then I am looking at days of being too exhausted to do anything, which is a condition that it's likely I've developed what's called post-exertional malaise, which will be a familiar term to anybody who is familiar with ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalitis. And essentially what it means is that you have a very small, what they call an energy envelope. And as soon as you go beyond that energy envelope, that's it. Like you are destroyed for days or weeks or potentially months. If you continue to push beyond your energy envelope when you're in that state, you can cause permanent damage. And for some people, if they're pushing enough, even if it's not when they're already exhausted, it can cause permanent damage. So things have become very, very different for me now. I mean, I used to do, 6-hour, 80-kilometer bike rides, and I have been trying to do a sort of DIY physio, and I've gotten myself up to 1.5 kilometer over 6 minutes, which is a success for me. So I try not to think of where I used to be and instead focus on where I am now. And for where I am now, that is a huge success, because a few months ago, I wasn't even able to do that. I would have wiped myself out for days. So being able to do that comes after a month of physio. And I'm lucky to get to have that kind of progress.
So there's a couple of other things that I want to specifically get your knowledge and expertise on in still in regards to these. So my understanding from what I have read and what I've been following is that doctors and researchers have basically determined that COVID is like, I read it was, they called it a disease of the blood, that it causes blood cells to basically get shredded. And that helps explain why it affects every organ in the body, because every organ in the body needs blood to function.
Yeah.
Can you?
So this is a yes. This is a yes and a no. Well, or maybe more accurately, a yes and a we don't know. Definitely, COVID does cause persistent changes in the blood. Like I need to be on anticoagulants now, because otherwise I'm having microclots all the time and blurry vision because eyes do not like microclots, things like that. It is a very strong hypothesis that microclots are causing a lot of the lingering damage that we're seeing in COVID. However, it's a hypothesis that's still being explored in depth. And we do have long COVID people who seem to have normal levels of clotting occurring in the blood, and yet they're still having these kinds of symptoms. So it seems likely that, sure, these microclots are a problem and they're doing damage to what's happening around them. We're also seeing a lot of vascular inflammation. So a lot of inflammation happening in the system, the vascular system that runs blood through the body. However, we can't say for sure yet, and it doesn't seem likely that that's going to account for all cases of long COVID. My guess is that in the end, this is going to be a huge umbrella. We're going to be like, okay, this is caused by this, this is caused by this, this is caused by this. But how much of it is an enduring autoimmune reaction where our bodies got primed to, like the viral reservoir hypothesis is another hypothesis, which is the idea that some parts of the COVID proteins remain in our blood and then our body continues to attack them, thus causing like inflammation throughout the entire body. There's a number of different hypotheses right now, and we're working with all of them. And my guess is that all of them are going to turn out to be accurate for some people, or maybe most of them will turn out to be accurate for some people. But I don't think we're going to find one unifying cause. I think COVID is an incredible disease. And I wish I didn't feel such admiration, but like, as a researcher, I do. Wow, COVID is amazing. And if I wasn't in cancer, which is also an amazing disease, I would want to be in COVID research. I mean, we've never seen anything like it. It's extraordinary. And just the amount of damage that it can do and the ways in which it can cause damage and the huge variety of, it's an astounding beast. And however, I do want to say I do not jump from that to saying this is lab created, because I know that would have immediately popped up in some viewers' minds. And we have no actual evidence for this. And there are other diseases that are also incredible, and they were never created in a laboratory. It's just that pathogens are amazing in and of themselves, and they can do remarkable things. I mean, measles was not created in a laboratory, and yet measles has the ability to wipe out our immune system after a measles infection. It can literally wipe out all your prior immunity. Like, it's an incredible, we've never seen a more infectious particle than measles. It's astounding in many ways. Not lab created. There's a lot of incredible pathogens out there. Ebola, like the hemorrhagic viruses, incredible viruses, but again, not lab created. So don't jump from, wow, this is new and novel and we've never seen anything like it, to that means it was made in the lab. We don't know that, and it doesn't serve anybody for us to jump to that place. And I do want to, just since this has come up, like the idea of, and I'm not saying it's a conspiracy theory, because who knows, it could in the end turn out to be correct. I'm just saying I don't jump to that space. I do think it's a zoonotic disease, as do many researchers. But when it comes to COVID, what we have found is that about 65% of the disinformation out there has been promulgated by 12 people. Like, there's literally 12 people in the world, one of whom is the current Secretary for Health and Human Sciences in the US, Robert Kennedy Jr., that have put out a vast variety of disinformation about COVID. And unfortunately, we are now seeing a lot of revisionism happening with people's perceptions of COVID and people's perceptions of the vaccine. For example, a lot of people now think that the vaccine is a huge risk for myocarditis. And in reality, what we saw was a small and true safety signal that it could cause myocarditis, although, and they were saying in healthy young men, but what we discovered later was it was actually the subset of healthy young men that were also on steroids, and that did damage to their heart. But the more important thing is, yes, it could cause myocarditis in that population, and the risk of myocarditis from COVID is far higher than the risk from the vaccine. So even if somebody is scared of myocarditis, get the vaccine. Because the risk is so much bigger from catching COVID than it is from the vaccine. And I worry for this, for the future, if people are really settling into this kind of revisionism where they're like, oh, COVID actually wasn't that bad and the vaccine caused all these effects. One, almost all of the things about the effects are actually disinformation. But two, even when there was a case, the risks from COVID are still far higher. So that vaccine saved millions of lives, and I am so, so sorry to see people turning away from it. And even with the damage I have had from COVID, I mean, I did have to be hospitalized briefly for the first bout because my heart was doing things that made nobody happy. But it's very likely I would have died had I not been vaccinated, because what the vaccine is very, very good at is reducing the severity. And that doesn't always mean it can save you. And that doesn't always mean it can save you from long COVID either. But what it means is that when we look at unvaccinated populations, the rates of long COVID are far higher than they are for vaccinated populations. So yes, that risk is still there for those of us who have been vaccinated, but it is lower, and it is worth getting if for no other reason than that, you should get it. I mean, even if you're not worried about death, like, just get it, and get it for your children, please, because children are also getting long COVID at significant rates. And we're even seeing it in babies, where it primarily shows up as fatigue. And like, these children are they're getting what is likely at this time, fine, we can't say anything at this time because this has only been around for 5 years, but by this time it is becoming likely that some or much of the damage of long COVID will be lifelong. And I mean, it's a tragedy when a child gets long COVID. It's a tragedy when any of us get long COVID, but especially a child who had their whole lives ahead of them. And I have a dear friend whose child developed long COVID at age 14, and that was the end of her going to high school. And if she is lucky now, she can do a class every couple days from her computer laptop. She doesn't get in-person socialization. She doesn't get to continue. I mean, it's been years at this point. We don't know if she'll ever be able to graduate high school. Her entire life has been derailed by COVID and by the continuing effects of long COVID. And there's child after child that this is happening to. Until it gets taken down, which I'm sure it will. The CDC actually has guidance now on trying to keep children with long COVID in school as much as possible. But,
Yeah. The other thing that, and again, thank you for all of that. I'm really, really grateful and appreciative to have someone in the medical space that is so deep in the research, because I tend to be a hypochondriac. So if I read something or hear something, sky is falling. Oh no, this is
Right.
terrible. And then I come to you and you're like, well, yes and no, and here's why. I'm like, okay, I feel a little bit better now.
Fair.
And the other one that I wanted to bring up that happened with was that I know that there's been some studies that have shown similarities between what COVID does to the body and what things like HIV or hepatitis C do to the body. And that one really scared me, because that's the thing. People don't joke around about HIV. They know that that's a serious thing, even though there's obviously treatments for it now that there wasn't 50 years ago. But what can you speak to in regards to that, the extent of like those similarities and what people should maybe be aware of?
Okay, so I'd say the first thing that I want to do is address some of the dissimilarities in that, because this is another disinformation thing that comes up about turbo cancer. Okay, turbo cancer is not a thing. Turbo cancer is not a thing. We did find in petri dishes that COVID would make cancer grow, like cancer cells, grow faster and have more aggressive traits. That has not seemed to translate into the human population. So I'm really, really grateful for that as a cancer researcher. What we did see was the cancer tsunami. And this was also what led people to give credence to the turbo cancer thing, because we saw a whole bunch of people showing up with more advanced cancers all of a sudden. But the reality is, now that we have hindsight of what happened, it's that nobody was getting screened and diagnosed for the first couple of years, because it was more dangerous to be going to the hospital than to get something checked out, when in normal times that would have been checked out. But the problem is, now we're suddenly having a huge cohort of people that is showing up with more advanced cancers that normally would have been caught a year or two ago, and they would have been less far along in the progression. So I just want to address that, because that is a disinformation thing. And now, for some godforsaken reason, they brought it around to be about the COVID vaccine instead, because they can't say that COVID causes damage, because they've been like, no, COVID's not a big deal. So now they're saying that the COVID vaccine causes turbo cancer. It doesn't exist. It is literally not a thing. Thank goodness it's not a thing. So yeah, don't worry about turbo cancer. Please just ignore it if anybody says that. Now, the comparisons to HIV came from a fear that COVID was, we had some examples in research that it seemed to be down tuning the immune system. And so the fear was that if this became permanent, then people would not be able to fight off conditions anymore that they used to in the past. And then we could see those AIDS-like syndromes, where now a pneumonia that most people will never get is killing people with AIDS because their systems can't fight it off. I was deeply concerned about this at the time as well, because again, we were seeing these concerning research about like exhausted TD4 and things like that. But thankfully, that has not seemed to hold true, or at least not to the degree that we feared it would. So we are seeing, and again, this is one of those the jury is still out kind of things, because even though it's been 5 years, this is still new. It's still, and it has been changing and evolving over this time. So it's not even like what we're dealing with right now is not quite the same beast that we were dealing with in 2020. And Omicron in 2023 changed the game again. So really, we have to be doing research studies on each of these to be like, okay, so what is the difference here as versus there? Like Omicron was ultimately, we were still seeing as many cases of long COVID, but that's because even though there was less risk of getting long COVID from Omicron, we had more people getting it because it was more infectious. So that's an example of how things can shift. So yeah, there does seem to be anecdotally a lot more people getting things like pneumonia and strep now. However, I cannot conclusively say, because we don't have the research to back this up, that comes down to people's immune systems being exhausted by COVID. What it could be is that and again, I'm saying what it could be, not what it is, what it could be, is that we have a lot of research now showing that even in mild cases of COVID, it does seem to cause some lingering lung damage. So is it that people could be more prone to catching pneumonia now because they have some underlying lung damage? We don't know. We need more research on this. We desperately need more research. The problem is that research funding is getting cut all over the place. And again, because I think for a lot of people, it's just not convenient to really have COVID be a thing anymore. And if COVID's not really a thing anymore, how can we justify putting immense amounts of research money into it? But the problem is that it's continuing to affect people on a daily basis. And every day more people are dying and more people are getting long COVID. And, this is where we're at. We desperately need those research dollars. So hopefully we will start seeing more being put into it. I don't know. Patient advocates are fighting hard, but especially with the fact that the US was producing a lot of the COVID research, and now they have had massive damage done to the entire medical research establishment within the US. We're not going to be seeing them putting out the kind of research that we were seeing before. So
For
this is
folks,
tricky.
for folks like myself who are not really equipped to read medical literature, but want to stay informed and want to kind of avoid misinformation or sensationalist news reporting, because they have to get the clicks. Where is there a good place to go, or what is maybe the best place of the available options to go to be able to read? Sorry, that seems like a bad question.
No, it's just, I would have
Not
said,
easy to answer.
the resources I would have given you in the past were US based
Okay.
and have now been compromised. So I can't say check the CDC pages anymore because they are being changed on a regular basis. And I can't say check the National Institutes of Health anymore. Again, they're being changed on a regular basis. I will say, so there's a few people that I like to follow, and these aren't going to be specifically COVID related, but they do cover COVID at times. So CIDRAP, which is CIDRAP, is a aggregator or not an aggregator because they're actually writing their own news, but it's news briefs about different medical things that are happening in the world of infectious disease. And they send out regular newsletters on this topic. They've also now put together a really good vaccine committee to try to replace the one that Kennedy just wrecked, that will be hopefully advising insurance companies and such on which vaccines need to be covered. And, they're holding discussions to try to get that so that there's actual experts there guiding that, which there no longer is. So CIDRAP would be one I would recommend. It's a team now. Your local epidemiologist, again, she sometimes covers COVID, not always. And there's also regional ones now. She has other epidemiologists that are also working on it. But she's Caitlin Jetelina is her name, but your local epidemiologist is what would pull it up in a Google search. And it's easier to remember than her name. And she's an epidemiologist who focuses on public health and who specializes in writing for a lay audience. So, it's still useful. Like I love reading it as well. There's many other doctors and such who follow her, but it's really meant for everyday people who don't have a background in medical science. She covers infectious disease in general, also public health issues. So I would recommend her. Trying to think of which other ones would be good for lay audiences. It's so tricky these
If you
days.
think of anything after the fact, you can send it to me and I can put it
Yeah,
in
I will do.
the show notes.
There's been, the past few months have been such an incredible disruption in the world of public health that a lot of the things I would have previously considered safe are just not. And I don't mean to slander the CDC because there are still scientists there who are doing their damn best. And I am like, Hunger Games salute to all of you because you are out there trying your best against the fire hose of disinformation that is coming from those who have now been placed at the top of the CDC and the FDA, and the rank and file scientists are trying so hard, but they're actually having their pages pulled down. They're having the presentations that they made pulled. They're trying, but they can't overcome the rot at the top.
Yeah, that's well, thank you again for all that information. Like I said, I often come to you when not on
Always
everything,
happy.
obviously, but
Yeah.
well, like back in June, I had a scare with my own health where I thought that I had gotten maybe long COVID because what I was experiencing really matched with what I had read and heard of a lot of other people's experiences. And it may have just been an MCAS flare. I don't know because it eventually resolved after about 2.5 weeks. But I, for the first time in my life, was experiencing what you kind of said, where I would not be able to be out of bed very much. And even when I was, it was, I would maybe get up and go to the washroom, and then I'd have to lay back down for 3 hours because I was just like fried. My whole body was just, a dead battery. And I talked to a lot of people in that time, and they said, like, it's really crucial to rest, to not push it, to let your, like, take the time. And since then, since I've quote unquote gotten better, I've not pushed myself as hard as it was before, for certain. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. But that's really been in my mind, because I genuinely was like, I thought, as I kind of told you, I was like, I'm afraid that my life as I knew it might be over, because I can't do 90% of the things that I was doing before. And that was all the stuff that I was trying to do to support myself. So very grateful. And this is why, I mean, I was already still being COVID conscious before this, but I'm still trying to, because I have been keeping up with it enough to be, we'll say, reasonably scared, reasonably concerned. And it pains me that so many people that I know and care about, whether some of them said like they want to, and they just feel like it's too much to deal with a mask on top of everything else. And some people just, it's the social stigma, unfortunately. But yeah, I guess a lot of the questions here that I've sort of been asking about have been, I guess, a little bit more related to, like, this is more of a specialized case of, my first guest in this series did actually have ME/CFS, so we talked about that a little bit. I guess I'll kind of come back around and say if there's anything else that you want to sort of say on either MCAS or long COVID, or just any of this kind of stuff in general. I just want to give you the chance to, because you're just so full of good information, and I could interview you for hours, but I know that that's not possible. So I just want to take this opportunity to get out as much good information as we can. So if there's anything else that you think that you would like to get on the record here.
Sure. I guess two things. One, I remembered another resource, which is the Sick Times. And it's a news outlet that has been started by long COVID people for people that want to be kept abreast on long COVID news. So I would definitely recommend that. And the other thing is that we don't yet know much about preventing long COVID other than get vaccinated and try not to catch COVID. But beyond that, rest afterwards seems to be crucial. Like, if people can not return to their normal pushing themselves schedules for potentially 2 months after COVID, like, just take it easy with the workouts, take it easy with anything that stresses your body. There's some preliminary findings that could help reduce the risk of developing it long term. So that's part of it. So I do advise that people do that just in case, if at all possible. So, maybe don't go right back to spinning class as soon as you feel better after your COVID infection. Take some time, just give your body time, because it takes time. And the second thing to be aware of is that long COVID symptoms can show up months afterwards. So if you start having new onset symptoms, particularly if you're just like, wow, I have nothing in my life has changed, but all of a sudden now I'm depressed all the time, or I can't sleep anymore, or I can't seem to eat the same things because everything's making me sick, it could be long COVID. And where this gets especially tricky is the idea that about 25% of infections now are asymptomatic. So people may not even be aware that they had COVID. So obviously it's easier if you're like, oh crap, I had COVID 3 months ago, and now all of a sudden I'm having panic attacks and I can't sleep, or I'm having like just brutal migraines out of nowhere and I'm nauseated all the time. Okay, then it's easier to draw a temporal relationship, but so yeah, I guess be aware that long COVID can show up in a lot of different ways. The dysautonomic one that I went into detail about is really just one of those ways it can show up. But this is still a thing. And yeah, in children, be looking for things like fatigue and nature, personality. Sorry, dealing with a moment of brain fog here. Temperament changes. Be looking for temperament changes. So is your good-natured child suddenly cranky and miserable all the time? Things like that, it can show up. Like listlessness, lack of sudden loss of motivation. Like this was a child that used to be playing all the time, and now all they want to do is lie on the couch and watch cartoons. So it can be tricky to diagnose in younger children. Sudden difficulty paying attention in school. And with the sudden being the nature of this, like this kid was fine, and now all of a sudden nothing has changed. It isn't like they have a new teacher or something else that could be distressing them, but suddenly they're having difficulty learning, they're having difficulty focusing. That could be an indication of brain fog in children. So those sort of these signs can be subtle, but they're things to be looking for. And it
Yeah.
may not necessarily help you access treatment, because a lot of these things we don't have treatments yet for. But if you know what you're dealing with, at least that's half the battle.
Yeah, that on that last note that you mentioned, that was one of the aspects of this that was also really scary for me, because it's like, oh yeah, I've had brain fog before. I've had it where my brain is just mush and I'm fried and I can't really concentrate. It's like, oh no, that was not brain fog, or that was like baby brain fog. And I got to the point where
Yeah.
like I literally had absolutely no working memory whatsoever, and it took me 5 seconds to process yes or no questions. And like
Yeah.
I have ADHD, so normally my brain is going a million miles an hour, and it got put into reverse, and it's like, oh my god. So that was again a wake up call, and that's why I'm grateful that I seem to have. And the other thing I was going to say is that yeah, the resting really seems to be like I think a lot of people that I know push themselves too hard, and because we feel like we have to, because everything has just gotten so expensive, and just all these like stressors and strains, and so this is the thing now I've had to, and I'm sort of dealing with the government now to try to figure out like disability stuff, because I'm like, I can't actually like work a traditional job anymore for a variety of reasons. Even if I want to, I know it's not going to work for me anymore, for mental and physical reasons. But the resting and being able to like just, well, I did a talk recently as part of a virtual conference, and it was about burnout. And one of the things that I talked about in there was how I had heard that most people seem to have a tendency where they push themselves until their battery dies, and that's when they stop and rest because they have no choice. But if we like, the recommendation is to only like let yourself get about 50% roughly, 40 to 60%, and stop there and then recharge, because if you always go to zero, you're eventually not even going to be able to get back to 100 again. And so if you don't, it's like, I know we're not literally lithium ion batteries. Humans are not are not that, but
It's
it
not
is a
far
bit
off.
of a similar mechanism. If you don't know, with lithium ion batteries, it's not good for them to fully discharge to zero, recharge to 100, and do that over and over again. That actually reduces the lifespan of the battery. So that's a similar kind of thing, and just that's not something I think humans intuitively think of. So I've had to retrain myself in terms of thinking about rest and pacing and listening to my body, because one of the other things you mentioned, I used to have this thing where I had this feeling, this sensation in my body, and I could tell like, oh, if I keep going, I'm eating into tomorrow's energy. And now it's at the point where I'm like, there is no eating into tomorrow's energy. It's like I will just crash. And so I when I start to feel even remotely tired or fatigued, that's a red flag, and just whatever I'm doing, it's got to stop. And that's a thing that like maybe I'll get better again, but there's no reason for me to push it like that again. So yeah, it's been a lot of wake up call with this, and this is part of why I'm really glad to be able to get this information out to people, and hopefully a few more people will hear this, or I guess hear, watch, read, whatever. I'll get the transcript for this, and I hope that it helps to convince a few more people to be a little bit more careful and be kinder to their bodies.
Be good. I mean, especially in the wake of COVID, because we've certainly, I mean, ME/CFS is not new. It's been around for a long time. We have seen it kicked in by other viral illnesses such as flu. It's just that COVID seems to be kicking things like that in far more often. And so we're seeing a lot of new onset ME/CFS diagnoses. Although I will say there's a lot of research coming out now, including a couple studies I was reading about just yesterday, where they're analyzing both ME/CFS people and long COVID fatigue people. And they're finding there's differences in cytometry and other factors. So it looks like although these have very overlapping symptoms, they may have two different mechanisms behind them. So it's not necessarily that more people are getting ME/CFS from having COVID. It's that they may be getting something that looks a great deal like ME/CFS and acts in a very similar way. Functionally, pretty much the same thing, because you're going to have to live your life the same way. You're going to have to learn how to live within that very narrow envelope. And as you said, back away at the first sign of getting close to the borders, because when you go outside the borders, that's when you can permanently harm yourself. And so functionally, it may not make any difference. However, down the line, when we're developing treatments, understanding the mechanisms behind it and the differences is going to be crucial, because otherwise we're going to be throwing a bunch of treatments at people and, oh, it doesn't work for these people and it works for these other people. Yeah, because the mechanisms are different. So if we don't understand the mechanisms, we don't understand how to target the treatments. Of course, this is a moot point. We don't currently have treatments for ME/CFS, but I have to hope that we will.
Yeah, the last thing that I'll do really quickly here, I am going to switch the little banner over here. So Block Blue Light, I've talked about them on here before, and they are Robin was actually the one that put them on my radar originally, and they are a lifesaver for me. I was wearing these glasses on the one of the other episodes. Yeah, there you go. Yours are right there.
Yeah.
We're lens buddies. But
I don't need mine for another 12 minutes, but
yeah.
every day at 4
So I
p.m.
have for the people who might just be listening and are not watching on YouTube. So Block Blue Light, their website is blockbluelight.com, but I have not a promo code. Like I have a URL. It used to have a coupon code that you could put in at checkout, but they changed it. So now you actually have to go to the website using my special link, and then whatever you buy from that, you'll get the discount. So it's in the show notes. It's blockbluelight.com/?ref equals Lacey, just my first name. And you go there and you'll get 10%, unless if they're having a sale already, then that doesn't work. But they do have a lot of those, thankfully. But I swear by this stuff. I've been using it ever since Robin told me about it. I ordered some. I've got lamps. I've got.
For those that are tuning in and do not have the background, these are useful if you have a delayed sleep phase disorder, if you are a shift worker, basically if you can't fall asleep at night, and however you can still sleep long enough in the day, then you probably have delayed sleep phase disorder. This will help for that, because it tricks your brain into thinking that dusk falls much earlier than it actually does. And then your systems start going. So for me, I used to not be able to sleep until 4 or 5 in the morning, which is awful for trying to have a normal life. With these, as long as I wear them every day from 4 p.m. onwards, I'm able to fall asleep around midnight. So it's still a significant sleep disorder, but being able to sleep and then be able to start my day at 10 is a heck of a lot easier than being able to start my day at 2. So strong recommend for that. And if you do shift work, it can also help keep you on a more normal schedule, as long as you are consistently tricking your brain into, oh, I'm working in the middle of the night, but it's actually nighttime now, and you're not being tricked by all the synthetic lights around you.
Yeah, I actually use mine not for helping with sleep so much. I wear them mainly for sensory issues, because whenever I'm tired,
right, they can help with migraines as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been the primary reason that I have them. Because some days I wear them like all day and they don't make me any more sleepy. But I was mentioning how like this is one of their little beacon lights, that a little clicker. They have amber and red ones, and I use the red lamp to wash my hair because I used to get migraines most of the time, and now I don't. And if I have a migraine, I'm stuck at home and I can't handle light, I can use the red lamp and walk around in the dark with it, and I can still get around the house. So yeah, I just again wanted to shout them out and thank you for putting them up, because without that, like I don't remember what before when I got migraines, I would just have to do the thing where I go into a dark corner with like earmuffs and sunglasses and just kind of rock and just wait, and it was miserable. And now I can actually still function. So yeah, but yeah, I think this has been super informative, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So thank you again for joining me, for sharing all of your great knowledge and expertise on these subjects. And Until next time, thanks for watching and listening. And this has been Hat Collecting, the Disability Experience, brought to you by Block Blue Light. All right. See you next time.